Hi, my name is Rebecca. I'm originally from Louisiana in the States, so the land of sweet tea and alligators.
Hello and welcome to Obehi Podcast. I'm your host, Obehi A14, and I strongly believe that everyone has a story to share. Now let's get started with this episode.
Somehow I've managed to make my way halfway across the world to now be based in Switzerland, actually. So here, actually, my background is in interior design and architecture. And I've had a nice little journey of exploring myself and my own story. And that's transformed over the past 10 or 12 years into working together with other people on unleashing their story and freeing their voices.
That is powerful. Story is everything. We want to believe that is the situation. When you can tell a good story, then you have the world open up for you, telling you, hey, come in.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know if it is Mother Teresa that was saying one time that there is no person you could love if you could listen, if you could hear their story, because story really is a powerful thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love Brene Brown says it's easy to hate from afar, but when you're up close with someone, when you have the chance to get to know, like you say, their story, you start to see the humanity in it. And I think that that's a big part of storytelling, is how we connect human to human instead of concepts and all of the things that tend to divide us.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So how is Switzerland? Because now you are in Switzerland, from Louisiana to Switzerland. So how is it there? How is the adventure?
The adventure is amazing, actually. Here I have seasons, which is also very interesting to think about as far as the story of nature, right? Experiencing different seasons, even to the different foods that grow at certain times of the year. When I was in Louisiana, it was pretty much always warm. And then every now and then we would get a little bit chilly. And once every 8 years or so, we would have snow. Whereas here we have our seasons. And, there's something about that change that also inspires a certain amount of reflection, because we feel, at least I feel, the year passing a little bit more tangibly. And so, it's also a beautiful mixing pot. Where I live in Basel, there are so many diverse cultures being represented. And so it leaves lots and lots of opportunities to meet interesting people and to hear fascinating stories from others.
Now, talking about story, let's learn a little bit about you. So you grew up in Louisiana now. Tell me a bit about your young adolescent years. We're trying to understand how you get into what you are doing today. Take us there a little bit.
Sure. So actually, it's funny because nowadays I spend a lot of time in front of a camera teaching other folks. But when I was young, I was terrified of speaking in front of people. And I had a funny conversation with my mother the other day, and she was just laughing again, saying, I can't believe that my little girl, who used to be so afraid of calling the pizza delivery guy, is now able to speak in front of other people and do big presentations. But growing up, I always had something for connection, for curiosity about other people's lives, what makes them tick, what do they find interesting. And I think that that's such a root of deep connection, actually, is that curiosity to understand how somebody else could think so differently, how someone else could have such a different life experience. Because it's very easy to get into our own little bubbles, right? The stories that we tell in our own heads about what's right, what's wrong, what makes sense, what doesn't. When we don't bring in enough curiosity and also empathy for understanding that other people's stories might be quite different than ours, This is where we end up getting a little stuck inside of our own heads and our own beliefs. And so I think that's something that living in other places around the world has also just heightened that curiosity to try and understand, surely this person can't be crazy. They're not nuts, they've just had a very different life experience. And it's easy to get stuck in that rut, especially with things like politics or religion or all of that. They're scary topics for a reason, because we have to step outside of our comfort zone, because it's easy, like you said before, it's easy when you don't know somebody else's story to just be able to make a snap judgment. Oh, you must be crazy. You supported that politician. Oh, you must be crazy. You like that way of living. Instead of being able to say, oh, if I had had that life experience, I can totally imagine myself in that same position.
You are born in Louisiana and you grew up in the United States and now you are in Switzerland. So if you tell somebody, oh, I am a Christian, that might sound very normal. But if maybe, for example, you were born in Afghanistan or in Iraq, and you live your life, you grew up there, then you move to, I don't know, Saudi Arabia,
Mhm.
and you tell somebody, oh, I'm a Muslim. It also look very normal.
Yes,
It depends on what is your background, what is your story. So,
absolutely.
what are the experiences that you have made in your life? Those shape how you define yourself today.
Yes.
So it's not like this is the way it is for everybody. No, this is your experience.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And not only that, the
Mhm.
beauty and the richness of what this world would lack if we didn't have that diversity of experience.
Absolutely.
Because we don't, I mean, there are times when I realize I see a connection that comes back either from another culture or actually from Louisiana. This is something I can remember. So New Orleans, right, um, is a melting pot of different cultures. It was first owned by the Spanish, then the French, then the U.S. bought this big Louisiana Purchase, right? But so there's a lot of African culture, obviously for difficult reasons, but there's beautiful things in our food that when I start to see like gumbo, for example. Gumbo is one of these things that it you can see the Louisiana recipes. They pull from Africa. They pull from, it's a mix of also a lot of Spanish and paella. And then there's the French culture of, oh, okay, we added the okra. It's this dish that is truly one of these things that shows the melting pot of that one place. And I can remember it wasn't until I was walking through the streets of Barcelona once, and I look up and I just felt like I was in the French Quarter of Louisiana. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And in that moment, I realized actually the French Quarter was completely influenced by Spanish style. And so even those little things about understanding the places that we know and love dearly and recognizing that those things wouldn't be possible without the stories of other cultures.
That's so true.
Mm.
That's so true. Without the experiences that we have made.
Yes, absolutely. So we
I
make
love
each
that.
other richer, not scary, but I understand it's difficult sometimes to step outside of the fear of other.
In the beginning, you were a very outspoken in front of the people. Now you are a teacher, you are a coach, helping people to overcome that limitation, if you want to call it like that.
Yes.
Now, how did you get there? What prompted you into doing that?
Do you know, I would say a lot of it is actually by grace. I was very young, thrown into a couple of situations that I so did not want to be part of. In my last year of high school, so in my senior year, as we do it in the U.S., um, I was elected to a position where every week I had to stand up twice in front of my entire student body, in front of the whole school, and not only introduce speakers, but also I needed to be able to call strangers and ask them to come to a talk in front of a group of teenagers, which, I mean, for most people, I can imagine sounds a bit like a nightmare. And man, that stepped me way outside of my comfort zone. And for almost an entire year, I was miserable. Every time I would get up, I've told this story a few times before, I would sound like a chipmunk because I would get a bubble in my throat and I wouldn't be able to speak. And so then, of course, people would laugh and, oh, it's so embarrassing. And then at some point in time, near the end of the year, I was introducing a friend of mine, somebody that I felt very comfortable with. And I realized that I got up on stage because I had been speaking with him and right before. And so then I get up in front of the whole class and I have no problem. And afterwards I was like, why? Why did that happen so easily? And every other time was so difficult. And I realized that I was more focused on my own excitement than I was on what other people would think. I was more focused with myself than with the context of the situation that I was in. And that started something that I didn't know it at the time, but that's a big part of why I started this company, Inner Architecture, is because when we have the stability here, then it's still, of course, our external circumstances do influence how we feel, but much less when we feel at ease with ourselves. When we feel stable here, the world can be going crazy outside. There can be one person in front of me or 5,000. And the way that I can show up is very similar. So that's something that I just see the beauty of being able to connect with people, whether or not you care about being up on stage or you need to be pitching a project or building your own company, or if you just want to have a better relationship with your friends. It's all about being able to build bridges, and stories are a key part of how our mind works to build those bridges.
Why do we sometimes remain within our share when we come out to speak? Like you were saying, we come out to speak to people, but we sometimes overjudge ourselves, even though we are capable of actually talking, speaking. We just believe that we are going to do horribly in front of the people. Why do we do that? Because now you are a coach, so you can help us.
Yeah. Well, do you know one thing when it comes to storytelling? With my clients, I talk about two different aspects. And one is recognizing that there's something that I call story weaving. And then there's storytelling. Storytelling is what we know. That's how we communicate, the words and the linguistics that we use and that we choose to build those bridges between other people. But our stories start in our own heads. And they start from us weaving together our experiences to determine what identity we believe for ourselves. And the crazy thing is, and coming from Louisiana, there's always this talk of voodoo. And, a little bit of voodoo, a little bit of magic is possible when we realize that we have the capacity to weave those stories in a lot of different ways. Sometimes I can remember once when I was living back in Boston, and there were layoffs in our company. It was 2008. It was a super tough time. And we lost a lot of really cool people. And I can remember having two distinct conversations. One was with a fella who was completely destroyed. All of his identity was based in this company. And the moment that he didn't have this job anymore, he was questioning who he was. And so he was really, really struggling. For him, this was one of the worst things that had happened. And I had a conversation with another friend, and he was practically skipping down the hallway. And I was like, explain to me what's going on, like what's happening. And he said, I've never told anybody this outside of my wife and my kids, but I've always wanted to be a chef. And right now, I was desperately trying to figure out whether or not I could have the courage to step away from this work. And actually, the company just helped me. They gave me that chance that I get to go now try out my dream. And for him, the same scenario, right? Being let go of a company, for one, it was devastating. And for another, it was liberating. They wove their stories inside of their heads differently. And this is a fascinating thing, right? When we recognize that not only do we have a choice of how we weave our stories, our experiences, but we also have a choice of how we can look back on our old stories and weave them differently.
How do we take those stories, those experiences that we live in, sort of explore them more during communication in a way that, because now we are tickling with a little bit of story, we are tickling with communication, and later on we're going to be touching also mindset. So how do we weave our story, our personal experiences into communication in a way that it can become an effective communication, not just communication, but an effective one?
Yes. Okay, so when I think about connection, right? It's all connection requires two. In a way, there is a separation, right? It's the same thing that happens into our minds when who we believe ourselves to be aligns with the concepts that we have and the ideas that we have, right? That's how we come into relationship with ourselves. But when it comes to being able to connect and communicate powerfully with other people, it is to recognize that once again, there are two identities. And what so often happens is that we get stuck in our side and we forget that the whole point of connection and communication is to build a bridge, is to find the way to not just be able to talk and have our words be heard by someone else, but to have them land and to remember that we actually have a goal or a vision or an intention behind why we're speaking those words. Because so often there are times when we're just talking and we've forgotten why we wanted to have this conversation in the first place. And we either, the two things that I see most common is one, we either get way too lost in the other person's story, thinking, okay, what do they need and how do I prove myself to them? Or we get really lost in our own story. We haven't found that balance. We think, okay, this is what I want, this is what I need to convey, and this is what they need to hear. And so it's about finding that balance. It's playing with that tension between two people of, I have something that I want to share, but I know that you also have desires and needs and wants. So how do we intentionally find that meeting point? How do we bridge between what I want to share and what I need, and what value you need to get from this conversation? And that's when we start talking about value-based storytelling. It's not just telling pretty stories to tell a pretty story. It's about how do we build that bridge? How do we intentionally do that? And also, when it comes to things like sales, when it comes to things like having a big impact, recognizing that sometimes we might not find the way to build that bridge. And that's okay. That's not failure. That's we attempted, we tried. We can still leave with respect for one another. But maybe this is not the right bridge to build at this time.
We have built a bridge because you're working in architecture. I look at your website. I really find something interesting there. But anyway, we come there just now. I want us to go back to the basis. What is communication? How do you describe it to people who maybe do not understand what it means?
So, communication is a fascinating, complex thing. And a lot of times we think that it's just what my words are saying. But it's instead what my words are saying, what my body is saying, what my energy is saying, what my intention is saying. It's how we express ourselves in a way that is received by others. And it is all about, in essence, how capable we are of connecting. And this is why I say the intention and building that bridge is such a vital aspect to it. Because if I give an example, right, from an old colleague of mine, I can remember I loved her very much. I still love her very much. But she's one that she likes to challenge. And I realized that every time I was going into a conversation with her, I felt like I was going into battle. And this is somebody that I liked, but we can easily imagine that with somebody that we don't get along so well with, right? And I can remember recognizing that as I was walking into a meeting room once, I could feel my whole body was tight. Like I was prepared to go in and share an idea with her, but I was already ready for the battle, for the challenges, for the difficulties. And now, I didn't know how to deal with that then. I was still back in the design world, but now I see how often there's a term, we carry the weather with us, right? And people feel that when I'm ready for a fight and I've got my entire body tensed, the other person may not consciously recognize it, but man, they feel that when I walk into the room. And what do we think that does for them? Of course, even if they weren't ready for battle, now they are. And so it begins the conversation with an energy and attention that is already setting the stage for how we're going to communicate. So it's to be aware of all of these things. And that's why intention is such a powerful thing, because if I'm coming in with the idea, I want to build the bridge. Now, if I look back at my past self, I could say, okay, Rebecca, you value this woman's opinion. You value how she looks at things and how she challenges. So yes, she is going to challenge you. But you know that the designs end up being better because of it. So you're not stepping into battle. You're stepping into the room with an ally who wants to make you better. Now imagine how I walk into that room. She's my ally. She's not an enemy. She's not somebody to be afraid of. And it's the same when we look at our boss, when we look at the people that report into us, when we look at our partners and our friends. How are we entering into communication with them? What is the intention that we have? What is the outcome that we desire? And then when we start from there, our conversations and our communication is much more powerful.
I think that is where we double into the mindset, because now you are sort of priming yourself. It's not like you are not. It's not that the tension is not there, but now you are so mature that you are just able to dance the delicate dance and able to still feel the tension, but you don't let it control you. You control it instead,
Yes.
so that you are able to get what you want at the end of the day, because you know what you want. You are not there just to talk.
Yes.
You are there to talk the talk that will lead you to get what you want at the end of the day.
Yes.
I remember I was reading the book by Napoleon Hill. Napoleon Hill was making an example in the story. One time, I think the janitor purposely turned off the lights one time, and he was so angry. So because of course he is very advanced now in psychology and all the rest, but yet he went there and said something that he did that of course upset the janitor. But instead of the janitor responding to him badly, the guy was cool at the point. This made him able to reflect more.
Yes.
So this ordinary janitor is able to get him this. So he went there to apologize. And the guy told him, don't worry, nobody hear us. It's only between you and me. and the war around us,
Mm.
this one, this one devastated him even more.
Yes.
So I'm trying to say here that maybe our ability to really control ourselves and what we have to say and the environment we are make a lot of impact in how we communicate.
Yes.
Because going back to you again, this communication is not just the verbal, it's not just the words that we are pronouncing.
Yes.
There is a lot about it that we are not saying, but we are actually saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you can expand on that a bit more. I think people want to learn more about it.
Sure. It's funny because I'm someone, I love words. I love linguistics. I love understanding the roots of where things come from. And words are such a fascinating thing because they're paradoxical. On one hand, something in my throat vibrates to make a sound. It comes out of my mouth and enters your ear. Your ear processes that, and then your brain decides, based on a certain, language set that we've agreed to use, I understand what I think you mean. But I can remember hearing a famous actress once say, she said, if somebody comes up and you don't know Spanish and they start speaking to you in Spanish, they could be saying the most horrible things. And you have no idea because you don't happen to understand that set of rules, that set of linguistics. And so in that case, words are meaningless, right? They don't mean anything because you don't understand the context. And so this is why it's such a fascinating thing with language, because I paraphrase it, but at some point in time, I can remember reading something from Maya Angelou, and she said, like, words are things, they're vehicles for our energy and for our intention. And it may be at some point in time we can actually measure this, but they're powerful because they carry the intention. They carry the energy. They carry that which we want to express outwards. But in and of themselves, they're quite simple. They're letters on a page or sounds in a throat, right? And so that's where we can start to understand how valuable our intention is. And that's where the mindset plays in. Because when it comes to the impact that we want to have, when it comes to the capacity to communicate, to bring about change, then we begin to recognize that our whole self is working together to communicate. That as you and I, we're both curious about each other. I'm curious about the work you're doing. You're curious about the work I'm doing. When you tell a story, I'm looking for how it applies to me. And this is such a powerful thing, is that communication is also two-sided, right? Yes, language is really important, but if you've got somebody in front of you who is hell-bent on not listening, you could have the most beautiful intention, the most beautiful words. It doesn't matter. And so that's again where we increase the complexity of recognizing that if we want to be heard, we also have to be willing to listen, because we would expect that from someone else. So wouldn't we be willing to give that to our audience to listen? And so it's such a fascinating, diverse playground, I would say. And our mindset plays into it, how curious, how open we are, but then also the willingness to ask ourselves, what is it that we really want from this interaction or from each interaction that we have?
It is true.
Mm.
Because now, if you know what you are going to get out of it, if you know why you are there, the reason why you are spending your energy talking, then you're going to be very careful what happened. Because now, if it's just for the purpose of talking, just talking, maybe you might not see any importance to it. So that might not be it. Then maybe the person just get you angry, then you walk away. But if you know that that communication that you are having now is going to lead to a contract where you are going to make a lot of money from it in your business, then you're going to approach it differently.
Mm.
Because if you know you are going to speak for this 1 hour now, and this 1 hour is not you're going to earn hundreds of thousands of dollars, for example,
Yeah.
because there are people who speak for 1 hour and they earn a lot of money. So you are going to understand that, you're going to approach it differently.
Absolutely. You know, you remind me, this is also about understanding how invested we are. And
Mhm.
in this case, money is an easy one to recognize because it's very tangible in the world that we live in, right? It's like, ooh, if I do this communication well, then amazingly, I might have a whole lot of that money coming into my bank account. Yay. But there are lots of different ways of investment, right? Like if we meet somebody that we find fascinating and we actually would like to invest in that as a friendship, the way that we approach that conversation and that form of communication with that person is very different than when we meet somebody and we think, oof, we do not align. I would like to get out of this conversation as quickly as possible. There's also room for this, but that's where the curiosity comes in, because man, I have had that more times than I care to admit, when and I think of myself as being a good quick judge of character. And yes, I've been right a lot of times, but there have been times where I've met someone and I made a snap judgment based on body language, based on the words that they say, based on all of these different things. And after a while, I come to realize, wow, I misjudged this person. And so that's also part of the humanity aspect of communication, of listening for, there's someone that I respect a lot, and he talks about listening for the gold. And in that case, it's listening for, in a very selfish way, how can I benefit from this? Right? What can I get out of it? Even if I have to listen to somebody that I don't really agree with, right? There's always something that we can learn. There's always a chance to grow our wisdom, to expand our understanding of, like we said, circling back, of another culture, of another way of thinking. I don't have to agree to be open to someone. And this is something that, man, I feel like in the world we're living in today, we're only giving credence and we're only open a lot of times to those people that we agree with. And the people we disagree with, we listen just enough to find ammunition for how we can shoot back. And yeah, I would love for communication to build more bridges, for us to not look at how we can weaponize our words, but instead of creating more division, which, man, there are a lot of times and a lot of incredibly powerful movements that are built on more division instead of how do we connect? Where can we find the common grounds that serve as the beginning of a bridge, instead of looking for, oh, I see all of the things that divide us. I see all of the ways that you are different from me.
All right. Now, say maybe you meet some people, maybe some coaches, people who are coming to learn from you.
Mm.
They yet do not understand the importance of communication.
Mm.
Um, what are you going to tell these people? Maybe you want to convince them that it is important that you learn about good communication skills.
Okay, I just give a very stark example. Imagine that I have, you know, in my hand, the cure for cancer, right? It's right here, and it cures instantaneously. It's like, boop, done. You're healed. And that goes into a box and gets shut away, and no one ever knows about it. What is its value? Unless we can communicate, and it's not always about doing it perfectly or beautifully, but unless we can share that which we have, right, with others, it doesn't matter how amazing our ideas are. It doesn't matter how incredible the information that we have is. It doesn't matter the skills that we have. If those stay trapped within us and we never communicate them out, we're stuck. And this is something that a lot of people have experienced, is that I can so easily imagine how many of us have sat in an audience and there's somebody up on stage who is an exceptionally good communicator, but they're not that exceptional, right? And we're going, "Ugh, I've done more than they've done. I can do that. Why are they so special?" And a lot of times, it's not that they're so special. It's the fact that they've learned how to communicate. And there is there's this quote that we've all almost heard that is, don't die with your story trapped inside of you. And that sums up the importance of communication. You can have the most powerful, beautiful gem trapped within you. And if you never learn how to have the confidence, the curiosity, and the desire to share, man, that's what's going to happen. Your brilliance, your genius will die with you.
That's so true. That's so true. And I want to believe that this thing called communication is really deep.
Mm.
It's not as simple as it might appear. You know, before you were saying that you enter into a conversation or a meeting, or you are seeing somebody, I don't know, it might be for the first time or for a number of occasions, but now you are going to have to exchange information.
Mm.
It is not just what you open your mouth to say that is actually the communication. There is a lot that is buried beneath it
Yes.
that you don't really say physically, but you actually transmit the information. All right, now let me look at it this way. I was writing a book that should be a couple of years ago now.
Mm.
Then I was trying to speak on the question of communication. Then I look at it. This is how I painted the picture. That now this in a beautiful morning, there is this antelope very close to the water, the stream of water to drink water. Now this antelope looking far ahead, see that there is a lion in between.
Mm.
Now let's freeze the time.
Yes.
Now, this antelope is going to make a calculation, a very fast one. It's going to ask itself, what is the probability of me going to the stream, taking from this water and going away before the lion can reach me? Okay, what does it even mean? Like, how far is the lion between where I am and where the lion is?
Yes.
If I were to start running from now, can the lion catch me? But what if the lion catches me? What is he going to do anyway? All these are actually thousands of pieces of information that you are going to process in a fraction of a second.
Yes.
And if you get it wrong, this is where I think communication becomes important. If you get it wrong, it might be very disastrous for you. You might lose your life if you are in the position of that antelope.
Yeah.
In a business meeting, you are going to make a communication. If you get it wrong, think for example, those bundles of information that was exchanged between the Russia KGB and the US CIA.
Yeah.
Those are just pieces of very fragment of information that were coming in, but those fragments of information were very expensive.
Yeah.
Because if you get wrong, the world could be going into a nuclear weapon war of nuclear weapon.
Yes.
When we are going into a communication, when did it become important for us to choose what kind of language we are going to use?
Mm.
Who are we talking with? All this information together and still be able to be effective in it.
So you've got beautiful examples there, right? Two really great examples. And sometimes we get so lost in the story that we're in that we also recognize, like anytime we open our mouths, we're stepping into a risky situation, right? We might offend someone. We might use the wrong word. We might, in the example of cross-cultural scenarios, we might say something that for another culture is like totally unacceptable. But there is also a massive inherent risk of not saying anything. Silence often has a greater risk than using our words. And vice versa, it's the same with actions, right? With your story with the antelope. if the antelope can never get out of their head, then they will die in that spot of thirst. Because, of course, there is that risk. There is the risk that we step into a scenario, a business conversation where we say something that just happens to be the wrong thing for that person. Had there been another person across the table from the company, it would have been just the right thing. There is a risk. And this is part of also understanding that confidence doesn't mean I go in with certainty. It means I go in with stability and with the confidence to say, I'll be able to handle what comes up. And if I don't handle it well, I can learn something from this. And in the case of the antelope, right, this is also part of where it becomes understanding the importance of relevance, right? We can also get stuck in our own heads. And there are times when we are grasping for more and more facts before we move. But if only I need to know this, and I need to do more research, and we can also get stuck in that. But very often, and this is why it's such a beautiful thing to go back to nature, because that antelope makes all of those decisions in a split second. They don't sit there and, like we do, mull over something for hours or days or weeks or even in some cases years. They sit there and they go, okay, what do I think? Am I going to take that risk or not? And then they move. They trust a lot more their intuitive feeling. And you know what? Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they end up like a meal. And a lot of times they don't. And this is also part of where we are so desperate for certainty sometimes that we don't move. And we live in an uncertain world. And so part of it is also just what is relevant to the situation. At some point in time, I might be waiting for more facts that it doesn't matter how many more facts I get. I'm still going to be afraid to walk into that boardroom or into that conversation. This is about me pulling myself together, getting clear on what it is that I want to share, understanding what I believe that you find valuable and how I think that that could be supportive of you, and taking that step. Because communication without action is also nothing, right? I can say a lot of pretty words, and if I don't back it up with my actions, not worth anything.
I'm going to ask you something about how do you begin to develop the skill? Because communication, yeah, I think you agree with me. It's actually a skill. It's something that you need to learn. You are not born with it. Okay, you are born with the data. Okay, I like data. That if we go back to the antelope now, we see that the antelope is not reading a book,
No.
but the antelope know what is the consequences of making the wrong decision.
Yes.
How did the antelope know? There are hundreds of thousands of years of experience that the antelope is going to tap into, the ancestral experience, because it has happened before again and again and again. How do we begin to learn this, begin to learn how to master this skill?
Sometimes I've got clients that get really frustrated when I say this, but the greatest key is awareness. The greatest key is that moment when we start to understand our impact, what we're capable of. And one of the simplest ways that a lot of times when I've got somebody who is nervous about speaking in front of other people, or especially when somebody says, you know, when I communicate, I feel like I'm saying one thing and other people seem to understand something different. I don't understand. And so there is something that is a super simple but incredibly painful exercise sometimes. And it is to take a topic that you care about, right? Something, it doesn't matter what it is. And this is something that is such a valuable little exercise to do. Small impact or small exercise, big impact. So first, think of a topic that you care about, that you're excited about, that you know a lot about. And then set up a camera, set up a phone, whatever it might be, and set a timer and record yourself for 5 minutes talking about this topic. Now, then there are 3 different ways to look at it, right? 1, look back, but turn the volume all the way down and just watch yourself. What is your body doing? What is the body language? How do your eyes look? How are you looking at the camera? Are you constantly looking down? Are you looking like you're all over the place? Or have you not moved your body at all and it's just like you're a robot, right? The second, run through and take notes. Take notes on what you observe. The second is to turn the volume all the way up, to put the phone or the camera down and just listen. What do you hear? Do you sound like someone who's engaged and excited? Or do you sound like somebody that you wouldn't want to listen to? The third is a really interesting one. And now there are so many of these little automatic transcribe apps, right? Transcribe it. See what it looks like in written form. Are you filling a whole lot of space with ums and ands and so's and, is there a lot of filler words? Or when you read it, you actually look through and you go, man, this whole section I didn't need to say. It didn't actually, it was a tangent. It was random and off topic. And the reason why I say choose something that you like to talk about is because then you've got a baseline of this is you when you're engaged. This is you when you're excited, when you're curious. And we can repeat that same thing with different topics, with the topic of something that we want to discuss with our boss. We can record ourselves when it comes to salary negotiations or a pitch if we happen to be an entrepreneur or solopreneur, or a discussion that we would like to propose to our partner or a friend. And the same kind of thing, what it does is it gives us feedback. It gives us something to work with and to play with, to say, how could I do this a little bit better? And oftentimes the difference between recording 1 and recording 2 is also night and day, because just seeing something, it brings us an idea of what we might be able to do differently. So this is an exercise that I love to do with folks because it's super simple and it's incredibly powerful for giving us feedback and greater awareness about how we show up, not just with our words, but our body language and our energy and all of these things that go into powerful communication.
How much emphasis do you play on clear communication, on everything have to do with our thoughts now, because the information come to you that I don't know. Okay, let me put it this way: you are talking and somebody just come and pitch you, and it's very hot. That is information coming into you. Yeah. Now, what do you do now? You are going to express it. You are going to say something about it. You are going to either accept it or reject it. In any way, you are going to give a feedback.
Yes.
Meaning the information come to you, you process it, then you regurgitate it back. But of course, you never give it by the way it come to you. If that is what you are doing, then you are not mature. It means somebody can just get you angry because they want to get you angry. Just like the case I was talking about before, though. Because I think when we are good in our communication, when we are good, when we are master of ourselves, when the information comes to us, we ask ourselves, okay, maybe I don't want to respond like that because that is not whom I am. I want to respond differently, because that represents me better.
Yes.
So it means there is a lot that goes into the thinking. You think about it before you deliver it.
Yes.
So I was actually on your website just now. Let me see if I can pull it out here.
Yeah.
You said inner architect. I like the part where you said space for clear thinking.
Yes.
I wanted to spend some time there. I enjoyed reading that part.
Yes.
What does it mean?
Do you know, this comes directly from Viktor Frankl. So in Man's Search for Meaning, and in his philosophy and theorizing of how we can better process and understand connection and also meaning in our lives, he talks about this space between stimulus and response. And for many of us, there's very little to no space between stimulus and response. Meaning, like you say, somebody comes and punches us in the face or says something really hurtful or whatever it might be. This is where the mindset work is so valuable, because what that does is the best communicators know that they have a lot of different ways that they can respond to any situation. And they have access to those different possibilities. And that access happens in having more space between stimulus and how we choose to respond. And when we create that space, that's what awareness does. Awareness is that single breath. Okay, so when somebody punches me in the face, the first thing that I want to do is I want to punch him back or scream or yell or whatever it might be. But when I've been working on creating space for my own head, right? Decluttering all of the things that are in there and giving room for recognizing, wow, there are a lot of different ways that I can respond right now. And the practice of this, the practice of awareness and building more awareness, is what starts to create those automatic responses. Like what happened with the gazelle, right? Again, the gazelle has a stimulus. I see my own thirst and I see the lion. Now I have to figure out what I do before I respond. What is it that I choose to do? Now, the more awareness we have about ourselves, the more stable we feel, the more at ease with ourselves of trusting that we can find a way forward. It just might take a moment. Means that, man, when that punch comes through, maybe I take a breath. And I know that my first response is, I want to hit back. But then I can ask myself, what truly would serve me best? Would it be to get into a fight with this person? Whether that's a verbal punch or an actual punch, or what is it that I'm actually trying to do? And if I decide that I'm not trying to increase division, but instead I'm attempting to build bridges, then I might decide to walk away. Or I might decide to say, hey, that's really not cool. Or I might respond with a hug. Or I like, right, when we have that space, all of a sudden, so many things become available. And this is something that we see with great leaders, is that they're used to having the punches thrown at them, right? They're used to understanding that the world doesn't see things in exactly the same way that I do. And if I respond aggressively every time somebody throws a verbal punch, I'm not going to get very far. So I need to learn how to have control over this, because this is what I have control over. And do I, and this is one of my questions for myself, how can my action spread more love? Sounds a little cliche, but man, when I have the headspace for that, that is powerful, because there are times when something comes across that's super hurtful. And when I've built in that space, when I've got resources to be able to handle it, hopefully my first response is, oof, man, that really hurts when I hear those words.
Thank you so much for that. You see, that is really very important. Um, it's like what is often said, no, that what happens to you sometimes happens to everybody, but the way you react to it is what actually matters. um, because if we are just responding to everybody the way they want us to respond to them, we are not in charge of the game. We are just merely responding to their impulses. Therefore, they are controlling us. What I mean is this one, pretty simple. If you are a matured person, when something happened to you, You are going to respond in your own term, in your own way. Therefore, you are in charge. Because, like you said, if you are a leader, people shout at you and you shout at them back. You are not focused. Because if you are focused, you cannot be looking at all this because all those little noise everywhere, they are the distraction.
Yes.
If you have the time to respond to them, you don't have the time to focus on something else. If that is who you are, you cannot be a leader
Yes. Yes.
because you are going to, please
It's
go.
true. Yes. No, because what that just reminded me is this is my definition of self-leadership, right? Can you lead this one? Because a lot of people really struggle with taking on that label of leader, right? They say, oh, if I don't have people reporting into me, I'm not a leader. You are always leading yourself. And exactly like you say, if you are playing always someone else's game, guess what? You're not stepping into ownership of leading yourself. You're stepping into someone else's game. And so, yeah, you might be. I can remember I had one client who she was insanely sharp, very, very bright, had the most incredible ideas to contribute. And she was one that did not feel super confident speaking up because in the board meetings, she was part of the executive team of this company. And in the board meetings, everyone spoke so fast. They were constantly speaking, and one would speak directly over the other. And I said, so what if you don't play their game? And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, what if you just raised your hand? And she said, what, like I'm in school? I said, yeah. I said, because you know what? You've already told me that you don't want to have to play that game. You don't want to have to try and maneuver yourself into the place where you're fighting for airtime. So I said, so what if you don't fight? What if when you have a brilliant idea, you just simply raise your hand and you wait for somebody to notice, and at some point in time, they're going to do it, and they might laugh, and it might be a funny moment, but you've just commanded the stage in your own way without having to shout louder and talk faster than any of them. You don't have to play their game. And she said it was the funniest thing. She came back, she was like, oh my gosh, you will never believe what happened. Everybody was laughing, but somebody asked the question, why are you raising your hand? And she said, in that moment, I got to say, because you guys talk so fast and you talk over each other, and it's just not my way. So I have a good idea, but I'm not going to fight you for the stage. And in that moment, everything changed with how they interacted with one another.
And at that moment, she changed the rule.
Yes. There are always multiple parts, right? So one part is the practical tools, simple strategies, things like this, understanding the different types of stories, understanding the value of an analogy when you're trying to explain something complex. How can you find a simpler way to explain it so that you can more easily connect with people, that you can, if I'm going and I'm going to talk to a group of 6-year-olds and I'm talking about, astrophysics, I'm going to struggle to be able to use my normal words. But if I can make an analogy to snacks or recess time, guess what? Those little ones, they won't fully understand the concepts that we're talking about, but they'll have some kind of an idea. They'll have something that they can connect to. So there are so many beautiful tools, tricks, strategies, ideas, and also exercises for building those skills to more easily be able to communicate, to feel more confident before you step into a meeting or step on stage or step into a conversation with your partner. But the other side is the mindset work. And it is beginning to look actually at who do you believe yourself to be? What is the identity you have built up around being a good or not so good communicator? And how do we begin to question this? And this is something that I call conscious rebellion. How do you rebel a little bit against those ideas that you have of your own perception about what you're capable of. And we start to look at those and we start to question, is that really true? And looking for evidence where actually you're already a better communicator than you think you are. And that builds trust in ourselves. And trust is the flower that the fragrance is confidence, right? We can't build confidence. There is no way to build confidence. Confidence is an outcome of trusting ourselves more. And it doesn't mean that we're definitely going to do it perfectly, but trusting ourselves that we can figure it out.
To conclude the conversation, what would be your final thought here related to what we have discussed today? How would you conclude it in your own way?
I think one of the biggest things that comes again and again when it comes to recognizing that when we have the desire to be a powerful communicator, when we have the desire to be able to share our story more freely, is to recognize that already you're doing a pretty darn good job. We have the tendency to look at what is lacking, but one of the greatest gifts that we can give ourselves is to be more balanced skeptics. And so that's what I would say to those that are looking to increase their communication skills, to be better storytellers, to be better bridge builders. Look at the places, honestly, that you're already doing it really well. Are you communicating beautifully sometimes with your kids? Do you have a great relationship with certain colleagues? Do you have the capacity to share ideas and information with certain people really well? It's not that you're lacking the skills to be able to do these things. So often, it's just that we haven't learned how to take those skills into contexts that are a little bit more stressful and scary for us. And so the biggest thing that I would say is you're already further along than you think. So to look for those places where you're already doing a pretty darn good job, and then see how you can capitalize on them. See how you can turn the volume up a little bit more on those things that you're already doing really well. And if it's helpful, reach out for help, right? And otherwise, look at some of the people that are great communicators in your network and start to look and see, get curious. What are they doing? What are some ways that I can incorporate some of that curiosity, some of that rapport building into my own daily life in little small ways?
Thank you so much for that. That is highly valuable. Now, you didn't tell people how they can reach out to you if they want to connect with you.
So one of the easiest ways is website, because that has all the videos, all the links, things like this. So that's RebeccaRoberts.com. Otherwise, a great place to connect is on LinkedIn. So that's actually how we met. And it's a place that I actually love to connect with folks. And I find it just a great platform. So
thank you so much, Rebecca. It has been a pleasure talking with you.
Same for me.
If you enjoy this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi Podcast and share with your friends who might need it. I remain Obehi Ewafo. Thank you so much for listening and talk to you in the next episode.